Hi, Becky. We're here today with Becky Butler, who is visiting Virginia Tech today on January the 5th, 2016. Sorry, I'm going to edit this out. Can you please tell us who you are and where you currently live?
Okay, I'm Becky Butler. Officially, as far as higher ed goes, I'm Rebecca P. Butler. As far as my publications and so on go, I currently live in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Madison, Wisconsin, but I taught at Northern Illinois University for like 17, 18 years. And before that, I was at East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee. And let's see, I'm trying to think well, anyway, I just retired from NIU in August 2015, the end of August 2015.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Could you tell us a little bit about your career path, such as what educational institutions you've worked at and your different jobs and places of employment?
Okay, well, my career path starts out, if you want to go way back, I was a school librarian, and that's how my first career path was. After I got my bachelor's degree in library science from the University of Northern Iowa, and I was a school librarian in Iowa for a couple years, and then I went to Venezuela, and I was a school librarian in a private school in Caracas, Venezuela for a couple of years, and then I came back to Iowa and did it again for a couple of years. And after that, then my career went lots of different places, but that's where I first got really interested in technology, because I was one of those school librarians who did everything, and technology was a big part of it. We got to remember, though, this was in the 1970s, so we called it audio-visual. Even then, it was pretty much audio-visual. After I was a school librarian, when I got married, then I followed my husband and did a variety of different things, including being a travel agent for a while, so I have very much of a love of travel from that. But to go onward and so on, I have a master's degree, again in library science from the University of Kentucky. Oops, am I going ahead? I think I'm going ahead of my questions.
That's okay.
And then a PhD in educational technology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay.
So, but as far as my work goes, within that, after work, I worked in I was a public librarian for a while in Naperville, Illinois, and I did a lot of different things. I love history, so my career path also takes me I was a historian at the Roscoe Village Foundation in Coshocton, Ohio for 2 years. I also worked in Naperville, Illinois. They have a neighbor settlement, they call it, and I was one of their supervisors of guides, I was called. And I have a very funny story there about how a barn door, we're a living history facility, became open one day when I was there all by myself, and I couldn't figure out what was causing the problem. And by the time I figured out it was a barn door, they had called all the emergency vehicles. So there were several fire trucks, several police cars, an ambulance, you name it, and one very red-faced supervisor guide who found an open barn door banging back and forth. So I did that sort of thing. Eventually, I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. I have notes in front of me, but there's so much there. But eventually I went back to school for my PhD, and I always wanted to be a college professor, and that started me on the path where I was at ETSU for 3 years, and then I spent the rest of my career at Northern Illinois University till I retired.
How many years were you there at Northern Illinois?
It was, let's see, it's 18 years.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay, thanks. How did you become interested in this field?
Okay, and well, if I look way back to my childhood, I was one of those people that I loved media in any format. So I guess you could say it started back as far as that. I was a great reader, and then I was the person that was always trying the new things. Now remember, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I graduated in the 60s, so from high school. So, I mean, technology was not what it is today, obviously. But so that started me on the path. Then when I was a school librarian, I was working with the technologies. I was always the school librarian who did the audio-visual stuff, the one they would call down the hall or whatever. When I went to work in Caracas, Venezuela, again as a school librarian, there were two of us in a large school, and that was what I did, was all the audio-visual. My office was in the middle of this big library full of movies. Remember these, now we're talking 16 millimeter movies, we're talking 8 millimeter film loops, whatever, you know. So we're talking a lot of older stuff at the time, because this was still in the 70s. So, but that got me going, and so I was always interested in that. And when I was in Wisconsin then, when I was working on my PhD, I actually started out in their School of Library and Information Studies, and came to recognize that I really wanted something more, I was putting myself in a corner, I guess, and I wanted something broader where I could use technology in lots of ways. And so I eventually moved over to educational technology, and that's where I got my degree, and that has continued to this day then.
Okay, thanks. What were some of the major ideas or approaches that stimulated your professional growth?
Okay, major ideas that stimulated my professional growth. Well, I started out as a practitioner, and one thing throughout my professional growth in higher ed I've always kept in mind is the fact that without those practitioners, none of us would be anywhere. That's the bottom line. That's the way I saw it. So the idea of the practitioner and working with the practitioner has been very important to me. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't do my share, and I have done my share of writing very theoretical pieces and everything else. I've certainly done that, and I enjoy it, but some of the major ideas were things like dealing with that. Another one, and this came out of my dissertation research, but I've always been interested in men and women, especially in the field of educational technology, and why for so long the women were hidden. And that's the way I'll say it, because as I did research, and this is my dissertation and then onward, I was looking at the gendering basically of technology, and I found that the men were out there like blatantly, the women were very hidden, because I remember asking myself, even when I was still a school librarian, where are the women? I'm doing stuff in technology. I'm just doing this practical stuff, but where are the women? There must be women in the field. And as we know now, in today's world, there are tons of women in the field, but they were there all along. They were just more hidden because that was the culture of the time. And finding that out was fascinating. So that was another major idea for me, was that of the studying a male-dominated field to see where the women were within it.
All right, thank you. Okay. Who are some of the people who have had the most impact on your professional growth, and how did they affect you?
Oh, wow. I think probably one of the people, and actually it's interesting because I've been watching some of the other interviews online to just see what was going on, and this woman's name has come up before, but Ann Devaney really had a major impact for me, and I will tell you why. When I started out working on my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, like I said, I was in the College originally of Library and Information Sciences, and you always had an outside person on your committee. So I had two library people, and one of my library people, her name was Diane Hopkins, and she also made a big impact on my life, but she suggested that I talk to her old advisor, who was Ann Devaney, because she had come out of educational technology, Diane had, and she said, get her on your committee, she's really good. So I asked Ann to be on my committee, and I was working in the library field. And one day Anne took me aside, and I don't remember the exact words, but basically what she said to me was, you really need to expand farther into technology. I really feel you do. And she said, I would be honored to someday call you my colleague in educational technology. And that was so important to me. And she was right, and I did. So I basically switched majors, and it added a little time, not, I think a semester, not a whole lot because of the way I was working anyway, onto my doctoral work. And I went over to educational technology and became my advisor, and she has been a great influence. There have been some other people that have definitely influenced me. One thing, I've always had a great love of history, and because of my love of history, one of my major areas of research has been within the history of the field of instructional or educational technology. So some of the other people that I interviewed along the way really made a mark. One was Lyda Cochran, who, again, I guess you'd consider her like a second generation sort of person within the field if you look at someone like Edgar Dale as a first generation, for instance, and so on. Lyda was an amazing lady, and in fact I have a really good story for when we come to the AECT memories about Lyda. But I went to interview her as part of my research because I wanted to talk to women who'd been in the field at a time when it was very male dominated. And she really, really made an impact on my life as well. And in fact, after that was, oh gosh, that would have been in the 80s, and up until before she passed, every once in a while I would get a Christmas card from her or a little note or something. But she made such an impression on me, what she was able to do, and I still can picture in my mind these stories she told where she was, like one time she drove across country, and this is obviously in the days before digital anything, and she was a photographer, and she said she drove across country with one camera hanging from her neck and a couple on the seat beside her, and she'd be taking pictures while she's driving. And I'm just trying to picture this woman doing that. You know, I mean, that was her first technology. Her first love, I think, was photography. So Lyda Cochran. There were a couple of other people that I interviewed that also made a major impression because of they were women and they were working so hard in this field. One is not known, I would guess, in AECT at all. Her name is Irene Newman. She came out of Wisconsin, and I don't remember how I got in touch with her right now, but she was in her 90s when I interviewed her, and this was in the 80s. It's funny, she considered herself an audio-visual person and talked about how in the K through 12 environment, for instance, for so many years that where AV was kept was like in the old cloakroom of the old schools and stuff like that. She was sort of a local person, but she influenced me a lot because of her stories dealing with that. Interestingly enough, when I interviewed her, I came with a cassette tape recorder, but it was one of those littler ones. She was unfamiliar with it, and she wouldn't let me tape her. I had to write everything by hand. It was so funny. But anyway, I will see if I can give you that tape as well. I've got it, or I mean the transcription. I've got it somewhere at home. But some of those people. Another person was Mildred Batchelder, who came out of the library world. In fact, there's a book award named after her, an International Book Award. But again, she spoke of the early days, the 1920s, let's say, when she was a school and public librarian. And she, she talked a lot about the technology because, remember, I was asking a lot of questions dealing with that. So people like that. I could go back and even say people like my grandmother, who was a one-room schoolhouse teacher, who taught me that she said, once you have knowledge, you can do anything. And that has stuck with me throughout. I still remember this public librarian when I was growing up who they had the main library, and then they had this back room with early technologies and stuff, and not everybody got to go back there, but I was one of the kids that she would let back there. So that was a big deal. So those are the kind of people that I think have influenced me as far as my professional growth. And I guess other than that, just with the growth, just the ability to, also these, and they were mainly all women, influenced me to work hard, that I could achieve what everybody else could achieve, that I could do what any guy could do. And again, like I said, I know it sounds sort of dramatic or something, but I was in what was at the time a very male-dominated field when I went toward the technology end of it. So.
How would you describe your research interests and aspirations when you first started your career, and how did they change with time?
Oh boy, they really did change in some ways, and yet in some ways they remained the same. I have always had a love of history. I've maintained that. I've always maintained a research stream that dealt with history. And by history, I mean history of the field of instructional/educational technology. It started out with this gendered history, I guess you could call it, where I studied both men and women, but I studied how they reacted to the women, or how the women were within the field. That was my dissertation research, and to a certain extent that stayed. The history strand, which I've maintained all the way through, then expanded to include things like how textbooks influenced basically different generations of students. And what I've done is gone to historical archives like at Pittsburgh and places like that that have large textbook collections, and have studied their textbooks and seen how technology changed and and how it was reported in the textbook, and how that would influence those who read the textbook. So it became sort of a way of leading people along. So that I have continued off and on, some of my sabbatical research, some of my articles and things like that. Then I went through a period where I was utterly fascinated. Well, I love ethics. So ethics is the other area that I really like, where I was really fascinated with intellectual freedom, which deals with censorship issues in whatever format it's in, and freedom of speech, things like that, freedom to read, freedom to publish. That I worked with that and did some publishing in that area at the beginning of my career, along with the history angle. They were two separate strands, though. It was my third year at ETSU, East Tennessee State University, where I fell into the copyright sort of thing that's become a way that I've made a name for myself in the field these last years. And I fell into it basically because I was on campus. ETSU was a smaller public institution in Tennessee. It had about 15,000 students at the time. And I was the only school or any other kind of library person. And yet I was also the only I was one of two technology people. So I was one of two people in an entire program, and then the other person left, and I became the technology person and the library person. So I was called instructional media and instructional technology. That was me. So I was kind of busy, but anyway, somebody from the administration said, we need somebody to go learn about copyright and come back and talk to the university about it. And so they gave me this rip-roaring sum at the time of $250 and sent me off to a conference to learn about copyright. And basically, I went to some meetings, I went to some presentations, I learned some stuff. From then on, I started teaching myself, and sort of the rest is history. And the other strand that I have maintained throughout, and I've published a lot in that strand has dealt with copyright and in any format of items, so from print to non-print, the internet, and so on. I have focused on K through 12 and higher ed as far as copyright, and I focused more on distance education and that dealing with technology, but I've worked in any area, and I've published 4 books in that area and over 100 articles and stuff like that. So yeah, it's become quite the
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, knowing that you're retired, I'm asking this question anyway. What are your current research interests?
Oh, gosh. Well, I am. I just retired, and my husband says I'm not doing it very well. I have promised NIU I would teach a course in copyright this next semester, just a course as an adjunct or whatever you want to call it. And the other thing I'm doing in the spring is for the Illinois school, it's ISBE, Illinois State, I can't remember what it stands for right now. It's Board of Education, there we go. The Illinois State Board of Education is working on a book, and I've been asked to edit it, so I'm going to be editing that. But as far as research and so on, the 2 main ones, I'm still interested in history of the field, and I'm still interested in copyright. I find myself, I can't stop myself. I collect little things. If I travel overseas and I see a printing press, like we were in Spain and I saw this giant printing press, and I'm stopping my husband, quick, and I had to take a picture of it, and you know, and I said, early Spanish technology, you know. And I just do this all the time. And I've done, and with copyright I do it too. So I would guess it's possible I will do some more publishing. I don't know. I want to travel a lot, but I find when I travel, if there's a museum that deals with something, we've got to go to it. And my husband's just learned, you just do it, you know. Let her do it.
It's best.
Right. So I will maintain those interests, I think, and you
Okay.
know, we'll go from there. I
Okay.
guess.
All right. What do you think have been some of the greatest accomplishments of your career so far, and why?
Oh boy. Okay, well, one thing I always wanted to do was write a book. In 2016, I can say I have 5 books that I've written. 4 have dealt with copyright. The last one is a textbook for administering school library programs, and it also would work for technology programs, although the publisher was a school library publisher, so they put it out for school librarians, is the way they put it out, which is fine. So anyway, so that's one thing I feel I've achieved in. I was trying to figure out how many, I love to speak about copyright, and especially to those who know nothing about it, and I feel very proud that I think I've influenced a lot of people in that regard. With the history of the field, which is, like I said, one of my other baby as far as research and things I love. When I was at NIU, this was maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago or whatever, but we purchased the AECT archives, and they are housed at NIU now in a one-room schoolhouse. And from the time they came, very often I was the only professor in the university who used the collection, and I taught with it. I developed a class on the history of technology, of educational technology, and I worked with students. It was mainly doc students, and we would work within those archives. They would do reports on things. We would talk about the early days of the field, do different research. Anyway, basically, I really feel proud of, I think I influenced generation or so of doc students anyway, to understand that you aren't just up front in the future or in all the new stuff, that you came from somewhere else, and that where you came from supports all that new stuff, and that you do need to know it. I've directed several dissertations that were historical, influenced other students I know, have written articles and done research in the history of the field, and they say I've influenced them with that. One of my doc students even wrote a book on the history of the field, in his case, educational radio. That was his area of interest. And, you know, he said I was a major influence in pushing him along that line. And I'm those kind of things I'm proud of, that I've introduced people to this kind of stuff. That and copyright, the people that have said that I've changed their lives when it comes to understanding things about that. So those two areas, and again, yeah.
Okay.
And if I'm talking too much.
No, you're great. Thanks. Okay. Thinking about your time in the field, what are some of the most significant developments that you have experienced?
Oh boy. Well, like most people, the computer was a huge development, because obviously I started in this field pre-computer. I'm not as old, obviously, as some people who were maybe pre-something else, but I did start pre-computer. When I started in the field, one of my things that really influenced me, for instance, was the day I discovered that you could actually carry technology home. And by that, what I was carrying home was an 8mm film loop projector that must have weighed 25 pounds and several tapes, which, by the way, when I got home, I discovered I had some of the tapes didn't work in that projector, you know, because there was not the consistency of things within that. But so when things got smaller, that was an influence. The internet, of course, is a huge influence. For me, another influence actually was that when video cassettes, videos went from reel-to-reel video to cassette video. That was huge for me. And the reason for that was I was working I was a student getting my master's at the University of Kentucky at the time, and I was their technology GA, only actually they called me the audiovisual GA, but whatever. Anyway, they'd send me out like to take pictures or film things, and honestly, to film something at that time, I'd be pushing this huge cart with a reel-to-reel videotape thing on it, and this huge camera and all this stuff trying to tape something. It was entertaining. So I'll tell you, when cassette tapes came along for video, that was amazing. I loved it.
Life-changing.
So, right. So even before the computer would have been the video cassette. So those are some of the things that I think I would consider important.
Alrighty. How do you want to be remembered within the profession?
Oh, gosh. Well, I want to be remembered as someone who was a researcher in the areas of history of the field and copyright. But more than that, I want to be remembered as someone who was able to teach people, work with people, that helped people make their lives better, someone who was kind and fair and supportive to all those other people. That's what I'd like to be remembered as.
Now for the stories. What are your favorite AECT memories, and are there any good stories you'd like to leave us with?
Oh gosh. Well, I'll tell you, there are some fun ones. One happened, and I don't remember the year, but we were at Long Beach one year, AECT was, and I had friends out there like Ann Devaney, and I had another friend out there, her name was Joan Hayner, and she was a member of AECT then. I don't think she is anymore, but anyway, she lived near Long Beach, and she said, why don't you come and stay at my house? So I was staying at her house, and one day I think it was about 1 in the afternoon, I was supposed to have a presentation with Ann. And anyway, I'd spent the night with Joan, and in the morning we were goofing around, and it seems to me, for whatever reason, we went to Disneyland for a little bit or something. It was I don't know. We were young and goofing around, and anyway, bottom line, all of a sudden we realized we had to get going, or I was going to miss my own presentation with Ann. So we're driving down the freeway in California, and traffic galore. All of a sudden, Joan screams, and she cuts across 4 lanes of traffic. I've never seen anything like it. It scared me half to death. We pull up on the edge of the road. We were out of gas, completely out of gas. So, long story short, so to speak, at the time of my presentation, I was standing with Joan on the edge of the freeway, waiting for somebody to bring us gas. Well, Ann was presenting an AECT for us. Apparently, she kept saying every 2 or 3 minutes, "I don't know where Becky is. She was supposed to do this part." So, anyway, so we finally made it there, but the presentation was long gone. By then, it was over.
Has she forgiven you?
She's forgiven me.
Good. Oh, that's
so
great.
that was one that was funny. Another one that sort of is AECT related, it wasn't at a conference, but was the first time I interviewed Lyda Cochran. This was, she lived in Iowa City, Iowa. And I didn't realize it, but she apparently was quite the Hawkeye fan. Anyway, there was a big football game the day I had set up to interview with her. It was Iowa versus Wisconsin. So my husband is this big Wisconsin fan, and of course I was a Wisconsin student. So he had gotten tickets for us all to go to the game, and I was supposed to interview Lyda before the game. So I come, and she said, "You can park in my driveway," because she lived right near the stadium. So we pull up, I parked in the driveway, I unloaded again a video camera and all this other stuff because I was interviewing her, and I was dressed in my red and white, and I come knocking on the door, and she opens up the door, and she's dressed in yellow and black. It was hilarious. So first we had to talk sports a little bit, which was really fun. She loved the Hawkeyes, I tell you. She really loved the Hawkeyes. So that was a fun one too.
I had no idea.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, as far as AECT, over the years going to the conferences, done a ton of networking, met a lot of wonderful people. It's been it's a very fulfilling thing to have been a part of AECT all these years, and to have done all this stuff. So, just in general, that was a really cool time. It's been really nice, all that sort of thing. But I'm sure when this tape is over, I will remember some more. But right now, those are the ones that stick in my mind.
Well, you've made me think of another question. It's easy, don't worry. But this is not on here. But
That's okay.
You've played such a large role in AECT for many years. Can you talk a little bit about the different leadership kinds of activities that you've engaged in with AECT?
Oh, gosh. Well, I started in AECT when I was a doc student, and that was mainly because Ann told me that would be a good organization to join. At the time, she also told me to go to IVLA, which was one of the subsets, and I did that as well. But AECT became more of the one that I was interested in. So I started out basically as a student. Early on, within the first 2 or 3 years, I got on the History and Archives Committee as a member. I was on that for several years as a member. Luke Boone was the chair. Then he brought me on as the co-chair. I was the co-chair with him for several years. Then when he said he wanted a rest, so to speak, I became the chair, and I've been the chair, I think, for 11 years. So I finally, this last year, passed the baton, so to speak, to another woman who it's her first year, and I'm sure she'll do a good job. I certainly wish her the best with that. So that's been one thing I've done. I've been a member, for instance, of the copyright committee, and there's an ethics committee. I was on that for several years. I don't know, I'm one of these people, for what it's worth, I've done a lot of presentations at AECT. I don't know if this is quite the leadership thing, but I'll just say that I remember once sitting at a conference and somebody said, well, what are the good presentations you've been to this year? And I said, God, I've had 5 that I'm in. I said, I go to my own. And she goes, what? I said, oh, okay. That wasn't too good. But
I know what you mean.
I'm blanking a bit right now, but that's okay. You'll edit this part, right?
Sure. And I remember too, you edit the History Corner too, right?
Oh yes, thank you. How could I? I'm forgetting myself. Yes, once I became chair of the History and Archives Committee, one of the things I noticed is that year after year, it sort of got smaller and less, people were less enthusiastic because obviously we're in technology, so we look ahead, we look to the future, and sometimes we forget, like I said earlier, that the past is very important and that there's a reason for that, and that we, without these memories, we're going to do the same things over again, the mistakes as well, and we need the memories. We need to know where we've come from. And so once I became chair, and I do not remember who was editing the Tech Trends at the time, but whoever it was, I approached and I said, would you be interested in a column? I'd like to create a column. And I was told, yes, give it a try. We'll try it for a few times, and if it works, we'll do it a few more times. So the first columns I wrote myself. I just called it the History Corner because it was the first thing that popped into my mind, and then it became popular. To this day, I'll still receive email, especially from older people in the field, who say, "Oh, I remember that machine," or "I remember those people," or whatever, and they're just so excited. And then, because I was teaching classes at NIU, a class in the history of the field, where one of the assignments was would make them go to the archives. They'd have to pick a piece of equipment and research it. And because a lot of this equipment was really old, I mean, some of it's from the 1700s. And yeah, it is. I mean, there's some amazing stuff in there. And then through the 1800s and into the early 1900s. But they couldn't just go online and pull something off. You had to go to the library. Sometimes you had to look up the name of the company and call the company. You might have to, I had people haunting antique shops and junk stores and however they could to find information about things. And so then with these students, I would say, okay, if you can do this, I will help you get an article in a magazine, in Tech Trends. And so then I would work with them to come up with something that would be a column. It's expanded now to the point where I will do this for people at other universities. I'd be happy to, especially if they're working with students or whatever that want to research something. But yeah, the History Corner's been going on for, I don't even know how many years. I'll have to look it up. But it's been going on for several years now. I'm still editing it. I'm thinking since I retired, I may eventually give that up too, but only if I can find somebody else that would like to maintain it, because there is a readership. People are reading that. Because I get contacted, I know they are, so, which is wonderful. So yeah, I do the History Corner for Tech Trends. I also edited a couple issues of Tech Trends a few years ago that were focused entirely on history. 2 different issues I guest edited, and then I brought in a lot of different people to write articles for that. I've edited there's another, a couple other journals where I've guest edited history things that dealt with the history of our field, even though they were sort of like Vita Scholastica. They were, which is a journal that deals with history of education. It's not just on our field, but I did a guest edit where I did that, stuff like that.
Okay, good. All right.
Is that what?
Yep. Sounds great.
I'm sure there's other stuff. I'm looking at my notes now.
That's fine.
to
That's
see if
okay.
I
We
missed
can edit.
anything. I don't know.
Any other stories or anything?
Other stories. Wow. Well, I could tell you the end of the story with Joan, but my husband told me I shouldn't put it on your tape.
I can turn it off.
Well, it was just that we were so frustrated because I'd missed everything. We stopped at a bar and had martinis. We just went, you can't do anything else.
This is the ACT way.
Yeah, right. So it's like, okay. And he said, you can't tell that on the tape, so I am.
True confessions.
Yeah, right.
Gosh.
Well, I think it was once when in the early days, I used to often go with Anne and some of her other students because she had this like group of students she'd pull along. And one time, I think it was Anne, forgot where she was, what town she was in. She was telling everybody, welcome to some other town, because she'd gone to so many conferences she couldn't remember where she was. It was pretty funny.
Oh gosh, that's great.
So,
any closing words for the record?
Oh, closing words for the record. Oh gosh. This is a wonderful field, an amazing field. I'm so glad I've been a part of it. And even though I'm retired, I'm going to continue being interested. Who knows whether I'll come to every meeting anymore, but when I'm there, I'm going to be interested and aware. And believe me, if you see me traveling anywhere, if there's technology of interest, I'll have my camera out, I'll be taking pictures, I'll be making note of it. And
We might see it in the history corner.
You'll probably see it in the history corner, you're right. In fact, I think I'm going to dig up old pictures.
Good. Well, Becky, thank you so much. We appreciate your participation.
Oh, no problem. Like I said, I feel honored to be included in this. Thank you.
Professor Butler is a large asset to educational technology research and assessment. In fact, Dr. Butler's area is the library information specialist area, as well as generalist in educational technology. And at the master's degree level, library information specialist is actually the largest number of students in that program, and she's the only faculty member with that area of expertise. So she's a critical member of our faculty.
Advocate for yourself. You too are a teacher, and not all. For my students, the best part, no matter what I'm teaching, is when the light bulb goes on. Or they email me later when they've been out a couple of years and go, without you, I wouldn't have gotten this or that. And oh boy, that is the greatest thing. It really is. That out of this class, at least a couple people actually get the grants, and it's like, yes. My favorite part about the job as far as subject areas would be copyright law. Oh, it's an ethical area, but I just love it. And I research in it, and I've written 2 books in it. I'm writing a 3rd and write articles.
I think the thing that she does that makes her just a really stand out kind of classroom is that we're like an open discussion classroom. She has guidance, she knows exactly what she needs to teach us, but she facilitates us teaching each other almost.
She is an excellent teacher, but she is also a scholar and a great advisor and a mentor, and I think bringing all of that together when there's that synergy, that makes somebody exceptional.
I want to say tough love, but with the emphasis on love rather than the tough. She demanded a lot, but because she knew that you could deliver a lot. And I think that that's a really positive thing to experience as a doctoral student.
this is probably the biggest award I could get. I mean, this is so cool. This is wonderful.